Hey guys, I'm live here today with Nghiem, a webinar expert who has sold tens of thousands via webinar. Hey Alex, how you doing, mate?
I'm doing great, Joe. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Brother, can you tell us a little, those who don't really know much about you, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and who you are?
Sure. So I came from a background of selling, relatively big ticket programs. Had an IT e-commerce company back even mid '90s, and then sold that in early 2000. And along the way, I sold, for relatively high-end consulting packages. Usually million or multi-million dollar packages. And I've even been on teams where the projects were, into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And then I sold that company in 2000 and took some time off, wrote several books on marketing and whatnot. And then several years ago, I noticed that there was a kind of like a void in the market for folks that were comfortable or knew how to actually sell big ticket programs. And so I've been helping clients in that capacity, showing them how to basically grow their business, primarily by leveraging both a combination of webinars and also big ticket programs. And big ticket is a little bit of relative terms for a lot of folks in the circles that the folks that's probably listening to this. That probably mean on the low end of that, probably programs around 2 to 3 thousand, and at the high end of that, maybe 20 to 50 thousand. I do have B2B clients where 25,000 may be the initial sale, and where maybe a quarter of a million higher, maybe the higher end of that spectrum. So it's relative to the market that the listeners coming from. So like I said, most of the time when you're selling that, there's usually a webinar is usually an integral part of that. And when I use webinar, I can mean a webinar where you're showing a slide deck, or in many cases you can even use something called like a live stream. Probably the most popular example is a Facebook Live, where people actually can see you face to face.
Cool, so you're doing webinars via live streams now, or...
Well, it's interesting. We've actually been doing live streams since the days when they were charging by the minute. I recall we were doing like a major promotion back actually in 2008. Several years ago. And back then they were charging per minute. And then when we did this promotion, the bill that my client got was like around almost $4,500. And like, did we just spend 4,500? It's kind of like the old days of long distance, right? Where people are charging by the minute. Now imagine you had 800 people on there, right? And basically you're paying per minute for every attendee, right? And they're like,
Yeah.
this is ridiculous. This bill's ridiculous. I'm like, well, I agree that's, that's not bubblegum money. But I would like to point out that we made about, $275,000. And they're like, okay, so they kind of took a step back, say, okay, like the bill did hurt, but it lasted for maybe 5 seconds once we put in proper perspective. So I would say that probably the only thing that would outpull a webinar, now not everybody can do it, mind you. The only thing, because it does require a different set of skills, but if you can, I've seen that a really powerful one-two combination is to be able to do a webinar and a live cast. And what I mean live cast is like, basically where you're seeing more the person. Now, it's getting a little bit fuzzy now because GoToWebinar, which is the most popular webinar platform out there, they have added the ability to basically integrate in the webcam. However, I there's different production value. Like when you have a webinar, you have a webcam on. To me, that's still not a live cast. I mean, as far as the view is concerned, it looks the same because obviously there's they can see your face. But when you're doing a show, uh, when you're using more like a live cast, the production and the sequencing and the scripting is different. It's more like being on like what you see like on a TV, right? Whereas on a webinar, even with the webcam being on, it's still primarily a slideshow where they could just see you. So psychologically, it's a little bit different, and the conversion is definitely different as well.
Okay, when you say that, what do you mean by psychologically it's a bit different to have...
Well,
Talking
like
about
for
like...
example, sure,
Yeah.
sure. So I'll give you a specific example, right? It's very, very difficult to basically have somebody watch a webinar for, with very few exceptions. It's very difficult to engage somebody on a webinar for more than say 75 minutes, 90 minutes. I mean, I've seen maybe there's a handful of people who can do over 2 hours, but I mean, at that point, you're really going to the red zone. I mean, people are going to drop out like flies, right? Because the engagement is just not there. We've actually done like live stream again, where primarily it's like, where you're actually seeing the other party. We've done it where it's lasted 4 to 6 hours. And some of my mentors have actually done it where it's like 10 to 12 hour. You see, there's no way, I don't know anybody that can hold anybody's attention on a webinar for that long. It's just impossible, right? But the other one, it feels more like a show. And so the engagement level, the energy level is higher. And so there's a much stronger relationship. So you can actually have more time to build a relationship with that person, right? So I'll give you an example. We've done this, but just to make sure that we're, so that way it doesn't seem like, oh, well, we're like the only people doing it. Are you familiar with an organization called GKIC, Joe's, the Glazer
Yeah.
Kennedy Innocent? Okay, okay.
Yeah, I am.
So, right. So they're the organization that, basically behind Dan Kennedy and, all that stuff. So they actually have a model where they would do a promotion where the only thing that they do is basically a 4 hour webcast. And they'll actually rent like they'll actually go to like you could do this from your home office, or you could do a little bit higher end. You could actually go to a studio, right? So like, for example, on one of the promotion I ran for a client of mine who's a New York Times bestselling author, we basically did a traditional campaign, right? Webinar. We did pretty well. And then as the last step of that, extended campaign, we basically did a 4 hour live cast where I did the production behind the scene and the scripting. And on the screen was basically Dan Kennedy, my client, whose name is Sally Hogshead. She's a New York Times bestselling author, one of the highest paid keynote speakers in the world. And then also Dave D, who at the time was GKIC's chief marketing officer. So there were literally three people sitting, chair, and that lasted about 4.5 hours. And that promotion did almost. I don't know if the numbers public, but let's just say it was well into the six figures. You see, and it lasted 4.5 hours. You could not have done that on a webinar, right? Like with a webinar, there's three people talking. It's going to get real confusing because you can't really figure out who's talking. Everybody's going to end up stepping on each other. But when you have a live cast, and even when there's multiple people, it actually creates, So my point is that the energy level gives you. That's what I mean when I say the production value is different, right? That is different than say basically turning on a webinar, having three presenters, and just having a webcam on. You see, the flow is very different, and more importantly, the results are very different.
Cool, very cool. That's very cool.
Oh, by the way, this is just a pet peeve of mine. I mean, take it in context, please. Google Hangout is probably the one everybody everybody loves using. I will caution you that basically Google Hangout is beta technology. And I've never basically done anything on large scale on Google Hangout for the simple reason I've seen it lock up too many times. Okay, if you're going to go down this road, be okay with spending a little bit more extra money. So the vendor I would look at is it's like livestream.com. That's how it's spelled, like livestream.com. To give you an idea of the level of capability, these are the guys that basically broadcast like the Oscars. So the odds of you crashing their technology is pretty remote. I mean, they can handle 50 million viewers, when they're watching. The odds of you crashing on your promotion, I doubt that's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Google Hangout is basically, yeah. And the great thing is when we did, for many years, the reason people didn't want to use that was because they're very high end, it's per minute and whatnot. But now you can actually have a flat fee, and instead of spending thousands of dollars that we did on one event. Now it's basically the hundreds of dollars. So just, if you're basically looking at doing this, be okay with spending a little bit of money and, make sure that way, that it's actually technology supported. Google Hangout is very popular, but there is the delay in the audio, which kind of makes it a little bit, clunky when you're trying to do some of this stuff. And also, it's basically inherently beta technology. Anyway, I just want to kind of, because when people hear it, just run out and do Google Hangout. You can make it work, but somehow Murphy's Law being what it is, it's just gonna crap out on you when you have everything on the line. Man, that's like I saved $300, but I just blew $30,000 on that campaign I could have made if I did the thing it converted the way I wanted. So just invest in the right tools when you do stuff like this. That's all.
It's cool. So when you're saying you're doing hundreds of thousands in single webinars, what kind of stuff were you selling, and who does this work best for?
Sure. So the great thing is like this is it's a, very, very flexible technology. I mean, there are nuances, you're doing, but basically, the ideally what you want to do is like because you have somebody's attention, you'd want to basically sell things no less than 1,000 or 2,000. And here's why: because when you do this kind of promotion, keep in mind that you don't just have to deal with the fact that people have to register, but people have to show up, right? So if people are
Hmm.
showing up, you have their basic undivided attention. Now, yes, they may be playing for, they might be, checking out, Facebook, Skype. I mean, we all do that, right? Doing Skype or something in the background, or checking your text or whatnot. But for the most part, you do have something that's very scarce these days, which is their attention, right? And the great thing about a live stream or basically a webinar is that it's event-based marketing, meaning that think about all the steps that they did to basically, do that, right? They had to register for that thing. They had to basically put it on their calendar, and then they had to show up. So at this point, there's a relatively high, level of engagement. I mean, not as much as like if they had to hop on a flight and go across the country to a live event, but for the online world, it's probably the highest level commitment, right, that they need to make. And so if you have that, then what you want to do is basically maximize that. So if you're going to basically do the kind of numbers that we're talking about, 5 figure and 6 figure, my experience is that your product or the service you're selling has to be around like at least 1,000 or 2,000. And the good news is that the people that are attending that now, the market has gotten more sophisticated. There's none of this like kind of like sticker shock, right? Like, oh my God, where did that come from? You see? And I've even used it to sell, stuff well into the 5 figure, and okay, 1 or 2 times we've actually sold stuff into the 6 figure. Now, when you're doing stuff into that, when you're selling stuff into 5 and 6 figure, it's not, hey, go hit add to cart, let me check out, let me put $15,000 on my Amex, right? That's not how it works. It's usually to a questionnaire. You want to talk to them, make sure it's a fit kind of thing. But
Yeah.
that aside, the key is that you do want to have products at least 1,000 or 2,000. That's usually the sweet for most of the clients. For most of the clients that either run campaigns, we have a consulting arm and basically a model where we actually kind of like work with them, where we do it for them and or we work with them. So, two sides of our business. But basically, generally speaking, what we do is we advise them to basically go through. If they don't have a product at that price point, we help them basically beef it up so that you can sell 1,000 or 2,000. Um,
Could you
and
expand a little
yeah,
bit more on that those 5 and 6 figure um, product services you were talking about?
I'm sorry.
Could you expand a bit further on those 5 and 6 figure products slash services you were talking about?
Sure. So for there was a period where I actually had a product launch agency, right, where we would basically run people's product launches. I've kind of narrowed that down now where we're running more people's launches. But the point is that that's a fairly high end offering, and it basically starts at high 5 figure, and then with residuals, royalties, and whatnot, it went to 1 to 6 figures. So a lot of time, instead of trying to meet each person one on one, which could be very time consuming, only to find, oh my God, it's not a fit, right? We would use a webinar as an effective way of effectively um, pre-screening or educating the people so they understood the fundamentals. So that way, when they still had the question, at least we got a lot of the basics out of the way, right? And so then the following conversation was at a much, much deeper end of the sales cycle. You see,
Okay,
so
so
that way we're not trying to explain, okay, here's what a product, here's what a launch is, here's what a shopping cart is, here's what an affiliate program is, here's why you need traffic. I mean, you have to do that with every prospect you talk to. You're like, oh my God, this is like, I'm 15 hours into this prospect, and then, and I still don't know their fit because we don't talk the same language, right? So the great thing about the webinars, it's a great way of not just it's a great way to implement a philosophy which I'm a really big fan of, and I think it's where the internet has been evolving toward. It's just accelerating. Is this concept called education-based marketing, right? So effectively, if you want somebody to basically invest a lot of money with you with no prior relationship, you have to basically keep this in perspective, right? We're asking somebody who doesn't know us to invest right up front, high 5 figure, and then knowing that basically when the thing goes live, we're going to get paid, more, and so effectively we're asking for 6 figures right at the gate with no prior relationship. We didn't have a tripwire, we didn't have a $47 product, we didn't have $1,000 product. Right out of the gate, we're asking for between 50 to 70 grand for somebody that's never met us, right? So you got to basically build a lot of credibility very, very fast. And so the webinar was a great way that we found to basically pre-educate a lot of our prospects. And a lot of times we would tell them, look, if you don't have these criteria, we're not a fit. Meaning either your product may not be far enough along, or you may not have the sufficient position in the market for us for you to engage us as an agency, right? Like for example, yesterday I just had a conversation with um, a a an author. I'm sorry, blanked out for a second. Basically, an author who's basically probably one of the top 10 most recognized author in the business space, probably in the last 10 or 15 years, probably the last 20 years, in fact. Their books are sold into the tens of millions, right? And they wanted to basically do this campaign that we're talking about. And there, basically, since we're talking one-on-one, a lot of that, because when we went into it, a lot of that conversation could have been done prior on a webinar. Now, in this case, the conversation kind of, shifted in a different direction than its original intent. But had I known that basically that was the purpose of that conversation, I would have probably basically said, here's a recording of a webinar, watch it first, and then, we could talk a lot later. You see? So the reason I say this is because there may be people that's listening to this that's not doing just the traditional, hey, let's sell a shrink wrap product or sell a $2,000 or $3,000 coaching programs. What I'm seeing now is, and there's, this is a very niche market, but what I'm seeing now is like basically there's companies that have, high-end products or services, like say software companies, right? And then what we're seeing is like basically, and we're, in some cases we're helping them put together basically pre-educational webinars. So that way the prospects, when they do engage with a salesperson, they're not asking just the basics. They're asking more like, okay, well, we now understand the basic. Okay, but the last 10 or 20%, right now it's about the customization, like what's the maintenance fee and things like that. So it helps offload a lot of the stuff that traditionally happens during the sales. And so that basically makes, the whole organization a lot more, creates a lot more leverage.
So with those kind of people that you're talking about on these higher ticket stuff, would you typically have a pre-call before they get on the webinar, or is it straight from lead to...
You could have directly to the webinar, then you probably have to do the webinar tends to be a little bit longer, or depending on the market where the attention span is very, very short. We've also seen examples. Like I help a client, for example, sell a leadership program, specifically aimed more at companies, right? The initial sales $50,000. And it's basically it's a very specific type of leadership package, is why it's so expensive. But here's the point. In that market, because the folks are going after are senior buyers in big companies, you can't get them to sit still for an hour. Okay? So what we found is like we have to basically do it in 15-minute to 20-minute chunks, and we call this executive briefing. Right? And so there's a lot less storytelling and a lot more facts, a lot more dry, and get to the point a lot faster because you only got 15 to 20 minutes. Right? And then what we would do is basically do a minute or two intro, 10 or 15 minutes of content, 3 to 5 minutes of Q&A. Okay? And depending on how urgent their needs were, someone would basically book an appointment, in this case, my client, since it's, we're doing this on their behalf. At the end of that, first webinar. If they didn't, we would do another webinar. So in that case, what we did is we would actually do a webinar series, right? We would do what normally would be an hour and a half or 2-hour webinar, but we can't get these guys to sit still for that long. What we would do is we'd chunk it out and we would announce it ahead of time that this is educational series, right? Notice the positioning, right? It's not a webinar series, whatever. It's an educational series because people that invest that kind of money, they want to know that, hey, I'm making the right decision because there's a lot of money and, a lot of times it's actually a lot of, involving a lot of people. So in that case right there, we basically make the webinar shorter. In certain markets, if you basically want to improve the engagement, you could do things like, creating an engagement device ahead of time, like a checklist, or basically a worksheet that they have to fill. And you basically, you're seeing those words like it's intentionally blank, like the top 3 secrets, to doing blank or something, right? And then basically they would fill in secret number 1, but number 2 is number 3 is incomplete. And your brain, because I can't remember like the Zygous effect or something like that. Your brain just screams like, damn it, I gotta know what number 2, number 3 is. I gotta get in this webinar, right? So those are some of the things that create a curiosity and and gets people kind of like so that way that does improve the show up rate. So, and it also, in answer to your question, it is a pre-webinar consumption device. So,
cool, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Something that might be of interest to you. I've got a client currently who is a franchise business, so they're using webinars as their education slash sales process. So they'll have a
Mhm.
pre-phone call, then they'll
Right,
get them on the webinar.
right.
What advice would you give to them? So what is it that they should be doing to optimize their sales process with
Sure.
webinars?
Yeah. So without knowing more, here's several things I've seen that people do. Now franchises, just for just so we're on the same page, at least here in the U.S. I don't know of any franchise starts under five figure, and many of them go well to the six figure, right?
It's
As
about
an initial fee, and
40K
it,
investment.
right, yeah, and then the build out sometimes double the price of the initial fee. So what I would do is, and now this is not a webinar per se, but it's a marketing thing, but it does affect the webinar results. Is when we work with folks, is we make sure that are you it's are you basically targeting the right people? Now, when I say that, people say, okay, I mean, it's, some people, they get a little bit offended. It's like, okay, like we've been doing this for a couple of years. So of course we are targeting the right people. I'm saying, well, I'm just starting at first principle. I'm starting with a clean slate. So I'm going to ask you some of the fundamentals. And amazingly, even like 10, 20% of the time, even people that's very sophisticated, you find out that they went after the market they knew, but they never really stepped back and said, well, are there other buyers that's more, that's a better fit for this, right? So, so to answer your question right there, in almost every market, there's like maybe a 20, 30% subset of that market. That's like the ideal buyer for them. So one way I would say is like, okay, they're basically selling a franchise. So probably they're going after people, again, I'm using more the US. There's probably subtle differences, maybe Australia, but probably more similar than different. Most likely that buyer is probably in their mid 40s, right? They're probably a little bit burnt out in
Yeah.
corporate. They want to do their own thing, but they don't want to actually jump off, into the great unknown. So they want to have some structures. That's a typical franchise buyer. Now, what you're going to find though is like basically there's probably other indicators that they may be a better buyer than that, right? So for example, have they bought, previous business opportunity, for example, right? Have they maybe subscribed or basically attended a previous franchise show? You see, because buying a franchise is not something you fall out of bed. Say, "Ah, I'm just going to go buy a franchise." It's not a home
Yeah.
study course, even a coach. I mean, it's a huge commitment, right? Usually, it's lifestyle change, career change. It's a pretty major purchase. So I would basically say, like, are there other ways of basically, targeting your audience even more? Okay, but setting aside that, and then to say that, they've already done that. Then on the webinar, I would basically then talk about what the set the buying criteria when you're selling high end programs. I just went through this yesterday. Again, what is I learned this from somebody who's selling basically jets. To like very, very high net worth individuals, like 30, 50 million dollars. You talk about high end,
Yeah.
that's a pretty high end thing, right? Like, and she's not selling companies, she's selling to like, multi millionaires, right? So one of the things that happens a lot when you're doing complex sales, that's another term for big ticket sales, is you want to basically set the criteria because a lot of time when people are buying this stuff, they don't know what they're looking for, right? Like that author I was talking about yesterday, they're on the lookout saying, well, we want to hire an agency to help us like manage this whole thing. And I said, well, here's one way I can help you, okay? And this may end up making us, and this is how we basically demonstrate that we have their long-term interest in mind, is we basically help them define what's the buying criteria, right?
Okay.
So, for example, can without what level of details you can you give me an idea like what industry are they in? A restaurant,
So these
services?
guys are a vending machine company. They're in the US,
Oh, is
and
it a
like you said,
vending machine?
a vending machine. So
Okay, cool. Okay, so it's there's a marketing term called acknowledging the elephant in the room, right? Which is that you're very naive. You think that they're like that the buyers, that's the only franchise they're looking at. They're probably looking at other franchise, restaurants. Maybe the most common ones are usually restaurants. Depending on how much money they have, they also look at usually like some sort of cleaning franchise,
yeah.
things like that. Okay, so so broadly speaking, I would say okay, you know, so again, this is very rough script, but one of the things I would say on that franchise is this. I'm sorry, on that presentation, this say, hey, look, you've probably been looking at a franchise, whatever. So and so the idea is that you go through everything, but I would put in a portion in that franchise presentation where saying, look, here's basically, when you're looking for a franchise, right? And if lifestyle is important to you, then you would want to basically purchase a franchise where you don't have to be there all the time, right? So then I
Yeah.
would put up a three-column thing. It's okay. Here's a restaurant franchise, here's a cleaning franchise, and here's our franchise. Well, most restaurant franchise, unless like you're buying a smaller franchise, most restaurant franchise require you to be on site. I know
Okay.
for a fact you're buying, at least in the US, if you're buying a Subway franchise, if you only have one franchise, they don't allow you to be an absentee owner. It's not up for discussion. You cannot be an absentee owner until you have four Subways. Okay?
Okay.
So if you don't want to be on site, you don't want to be buying a Subway franchise because it requires you to be on site in most cases,
Yeah,
right?
it's buying
But
something
that
as
pretty much
well.
kills your lifestyle because like, well, if I buy a franchise, I want to be absentee owner. Well, that's already, that party that you'd have to give up your lifestyle. My point is, we want to buy that. So in other words, I would basically set a set of criteria that I know is important to them, that I would basically come out favorably on. Now you don't want to score 10 and all the other ones score 0. That's just going to be too artificial,
Yeah.
right? But you want to have so that way you score maybe 8 and the other score maybe 3 or 4. You
Okay.
see? So this is how you basically can position your stuff as very attractive, and this requires obviously knowing the audience. Um, we did this exact thing when I had that agency that I told you about years ago. We said, look, basically when you're doing this for yourself, you have when you're looking at this, you have a couple of choices, right? You can do it yourself, or you can go hire an agency, or you can, basically. And we never told out you can hire us. We just said you can do it yourself, or basically hire an agency. And in the two columns, we said, well, if you're going to do it yourself, here's all the things you need, okay? And it's just rate yourself. And most of the time, they would have 3 out of 20, right? Then they also go look at another agency. They usually would come up with like 5 out of 20. They said, well, if you don't have at least 10 of these covered, you probably don't want to start this, right?
Yeah.
So they said, well, this is interesting. Like we can't do it ourselves, and nobody else can do this. But these guys said that they've done this before. Maybe we should talk to these guys. But we never actually came out and said hire us, right? We want them to conclude that. You see, so
Yeah.
when you're selling something that complex, it's a combination of using basically setting the buying criteria so that you show up favorably, right? And then letting them conclude that, because if they conclude that themselves, then they're gonna basically, then it doesn't require you to convince them. They're mentally enrolling in that decision. You see.
Okay.
Hmm?
It's basically the usual features, benefits, that all the normal sales process you go through in a web. What is a webinar sequence for you normally? What is typical
Yeah.
of webinar?
Yeah, so the webinar sequence, what we do is not very different than most. It's again, very, very similar, which is that, there's a series of emails that go out and whatnot. So I assume that at this point we're talking about live, not evergreen, right?
Yeah, let's talk about live one.
Okay, live. What we do that's different is like we basically do, we do more like what we call webinar stacking, where we basically know that, in most industries, there's only so much you can do, squeeze out if you're doing basically just a webinar and a replay. What we do is we look at different ways of extending the campaign so that way you can actually come back to the same audience, and then basically not have it feel like, oh my God, didn't I just, this is the 7th email I've seen about this. Come on, enough already, right? At some point they tune you out. So what we do is we come back from either different modalities, like basically using a webinar and a live stream, or if for some reason the client, the live stream is not an option, we come back with different webinars from different perspectives,
Okay, that's
different
interesting.
hooks, right? Different hooks, for example. So you basically have the choice of doing using the same modality but different hooks, or basically different modalities, or best yet, basically mix the two. By different hooks, I mean use the webinar, but basically have a different angle to it, right? So that way, because certain people may, we know this, right? Certain people buy more on emotion, certain people are a little bit more analytical, things like that. And so what you do is you have different, different hooks, right? So that way you can extend the campaign and the promotion that goes out. And then the different modality is they've actually done this in psychology studies. I can't remember the exact, phenomena that's happened, but you could actually show somebody, and again, unless you're trained to observe this, you could actually have the same content in one format and they have the same content in a different modality, and they actually think it's new content. Unless you're a hardcore marketer, you know what's happening. Most people would actually think it's a different content.
You mean because it's going from live stream to webinar, or what? What do you mean?
Well, so for example, right? Like if if I basically take a webinar, okay, and I did it, right, and I scripted
Yeah.
it out, and I did a webinar, and I did it as more like a not even a let's just say it is a live stream, right? And where the content is more or less this. Now, I don't recommend you do this. Ideally, you want to basically do it from scratch. But let's just say that you did nothing, not even touch the script, but you did the webinar as a traditional GoToWebinar slides. Very little of any camera,
Yeah.
webcam action, right? And then you did that same content as a live cast. Most people think that the content is new, even though they already seen the previous one. No, because it's
Yeah.
you laugh, but because
Yeah, I
like
get it.
right, because it's most people don't go around studying webinars, right? Like we do this because that's our livelihood. The average person
Yeah.
doesn't go around and say, well, they just
It
assume
appears
it's new because
completely new.
right. So I mean, that's kind of I think a kind of like a less inspired way of doing it. I prefer that if you're going to change the modality, then actually take advantage of that medium, right? So, but in a pinch, if you don't have the time, because you didn't
Yeah,
give yourself
busy,
enough time or
whatever.
whatnot. If nothing else, you could change the modality, and it would actually feel new. And then
Well,
people buying that in a new modality did before say, "Oh my God, like these guys are not, it's not a recording. They're right there. I mean, they're moving around. If this is a recording, it's a really good one. You know what I mean? Because different people have different levels of what's called a buying threshold, right? They have to cross before they buy, and some people just if they're a little bit older, they just prefer seeing the fact that there's somebody on the other side.
okay. That's
Yeah, and
interesting.
and it does vary a little bit, between for lack of a better word, industries. Like some industries are inherently more online, like online marketing inherently is more online. I mean, this just kind of goes with the territory, right? But we've done a lot of work, for example, with clients in the real estate industry, and that industry is a little bit more. It's still, to this day, it's still more paper driven. And so they prefer, if at all possible, seeing a little bit more proof that there's actually a body on the other side. Like this, like in a webinar, there's this disembodied voice and there's this slideshow. They're like, okay, what's going on here? So even young people in the real estate industry are not as savvy as older people in the online industry, because in that industry they spend more of their time basically talking to people face to face or doing paper, right? So you have to, those are just some of probably
Some things you need to
nuances.
be aware of.
Yeah.
Cool. From there, so obviously you said you had the opening emails and you got the live presentation or webinar itself. But based on that, surely you'd have a fairly low purchase rate the first time around. Do you then send out additional offers, or how do you get people back to the sale from that point?
I didn't catch your first part of your question, Jose.
So obviously you've done the opt-in sequence when people first join up for your webinar or your sales process. Then
Right.
they
So
go
you're
to
talking
your
about right.
yeah.
Okay. So you have the opt-in sequence and the attendance rate.
Yeah.
Right. The people actually
From
show it
there,
live.
though, what do you do to get people to make the purchase if they haven't made it in the first webinar slash presentation?
Yeah. So the basic campaign, of course, just a replay. Ask them to come back and watch the replay. Right. The one that
Yeah.
we prefer doing is where we do the webinar stacking. Like the reason they didn't buy the first time is maybe because they're coming in already with a certain skepticism because that didn't appeal to them, but they showed up anyway. Whereas if you came back, like for example, somebody who's highly analytical and the first presentation is more emotional, they're gonna say, well, that I mean, it was interesting, but didn't get much out of it. I was looking for a lot more proof, right? So the second one is maybe more focus a lot more like, hey, look, basically five everyday people that's done X, Y, and Z, and the whole webinar is there's no very little story or there's very little of you, and it's a lot more about basically just the people you're featuring and showcasing, right? Maybe they're actually live on the call explaining how the success that they had, and someone who's highly skeptical would be more likely to buy on that one. You see, because most webinars are usually about the presenter, right? The presenters usually talk about 45 minutes or an hour or more. Whereas if you do another one where it's all about basically maybe people that's had success with this, and you may come in, occasionally kind of like help with some context around it. That's another format, right?
So basically,
So
you got like 5 people who've had success. I guess
right,
going
yeah,
back to the
depending on like
franchise, you'd have the typical franchise webinar where here's the opportunity, this is what you're going to get,
right.
and here's the comparison.
Mhm.
If people don't buy that, you then take them to
Yeah, have
5
another
other
webinar
people.
maybe in 3 days. Right. Instead of just play. See, here's the thing, right? A replay of that same webinar. It's the reason there's a what's the word I'm looking for here? The reason there's a fallacy is because if your first message didn't resonate with me, it's kind of like you're screaming louder at me. I'm like, okay, I didn't understand you the first time, so you screaming louder at me, it's not really going to make a big difference. I've already tuned you out, right? So that's why you have to come back from a different angle.
Okay, cool.
You see,
Very cool.
like if I'm making if you know if you and I are in a conversation and I'm making a point and you don't buy off of that point, me repeating it is kind of counterproductive. But that's kind of what people do with a replay, right? Like, well, okay, well, they probably didn't buy it because they probably didn't see the whole thing. Oh, I'll just replay the thing. Well, yeah, you're going to catch some folks, but there's certain people that didn't buy it for your premise at all. So replaying it is like, okay, I'm making a point that you rejected the first time. I'm making it the second time, but you already rejected the first time. So what's the point of repeating it? Do you see what I mean? Right? Yeah, if I'm trying to influence you or basically get you to see my perspective, I got to come back. Okay, well, maybe there's a different angle that I can talk to you about that would connect with you. Right?
Cool.
It's kind of like going to a party, somebody who's very reserved, or they're a little bit, I wouldn't say adversarial, but they're at the party, they're a little bit grumpy, like, don't really care for this, and you're there, and you're like, oh, I'm just trying to basically break the ice with this guy or gal, right? And you're talking about the weather, it's not working, and you talk about the weather some more, it's not working. Okay, let's talk to what. You wouldn't do that in real life, right? You say, okay, well, maybe it's, maybe the guy, maybe the person's into sports, or maybe, they're into movies or something, right? So you try to figure out more than one angle. Right? At some point, maybe the person wasn't cut out to be somebody that, you want to interact with. But if you keep talking about the stuff they don't care about, you can repeat it until the cows come home, but they're not gonna listen.
Awesome. What are the things that people make the biggest mistakes with coming into webinars?
It's on a mechanical level, just not appreciating all the different levers you got to pull and make sure it's done correctly, the right time frame and whatnot. On a psychology level, it's not really understanding, what is it that the target market really, really wants or is concerned about. Now, those are that's probably in at a high level. I will tell you though, at least based on my experience, is especially if you have a strong educational background, or you're a coach, or come from something like that, a big mistake that I see people do is they overteach, meaning that they think that the more content I can do, the more I share with them, the more amazed or wow they are. And so therefore, I'm just going to basically be, this amazing person. And when I make the offer, they're just going to all jump right in. So that I haven't seen work as much as most people would think. In fact, that was one of the things that we did with our recent campaign, where that was the number one thing we fixed. And we almost triple our results, by on the next webinar. Because it would seem to make sense, right? Which is, hey, look, basically I'm teaching lots of great content. I've already built rapport with you. So when I make you an offer, naturally you can say, wow, this guy's been good. He's been offering lots of value. I'm just going to buy his product. It doesn't. If that were the case, then this wouldn't be such a tricky medium to master. It's usually more the point that you have to understand, like the obviously educate them, but educate them from the perspective of getting to realize the magnitude of what is it that they. Make them understand, they're on a webinar because they're trying to solve something or after something they don't have, right? So get them to understand that really what the impact that is if it's not addressed. Now, obviously, it's still their choice whether they want to address it or not, but really get them to understand, like, what's the consequence if they don't basically address that. I found, some people find it a little bit morbid. Some people feel, oh, I don't feel comfortable doing that. But I'm of the philosophy that, if you have something that can help people, you would want to do as much as possible, right, to basically make sure that it's in their best interest to move forward with that. Because some folks, they don't really realize, that, hey, if you don't address this, it will not solve itself. And in fact, it will get worse and will compound itself moving forward, And so that's one of the things, is I would say that's probably big, the psychology, the mechanics. The mechanics is usually pretty easy to figure out. You just have to, get help or read the instruction manual. But some folks, they don't know what, those are usually solvable. But the two biggest ones would be the psychology, the market, and also making the mistake that if I just provide people lots of great value, that they're just going to, when the offer's made, they're going to do that, which actually leads to my. It's okay.
Agitate the pain point a bit more before offering a solution.
Yeah, and this is actually that's a corollary to that. So we can either call it 3C or 3B, or basically make it a fourth one, which is that you have to be clear on why is it you have the webinar. Yes, it's providing value, but remember, again, this may cause some discomfort to whoever's listening to this, but you're really there to, as much as possible, get them to invest with you. Because whatever the hell's going on in their life, it's a big enough issue where you're not going to be able to solve it by 45 minutes or an hour. The best you can do is make them be aware of it and then also give them a couple of tips. But it's really, I think, what's the word I'm looking for here? Far-fetched to believe that you could actually solve somebody's problem. In other words, if you could solve in 40, 45 minutes, it wasn't a big a problem to begin with, right? It's probably an annoyance, right? But it's really something that can affect their life, their finance, their health, their relationship, their faith or whatever. It's really unlikely you're going to solve in 40, 45 minutes. So you trying to basically just dump more and more information and then try to solve it all in 40, 45 minutes, it's counterproductive. So for me, where I'm going with this point is it's more important that you basically think through what is it you have to offer them and then build a webinar to support the fact that they should invest with that. Because in my personal belief, this is the same belief that I like all my clients to have, is that we have something that can help the party. They might not realize it, so it's our job to basically get them to realize that. But you do that by basically structuring the offer and then creating the rest of the webinar to support that outcome. You see, what people do instead is they'll write an awesome webinar, right? Lots of great content. Oh my God, this is the best I've ever shared, whatever. And then they try to jam in the offer at the end. And I've seen this because I actually have clients who are keynote speakers, right? People who get paid, tens of thousands of dollars to make a speech. Now, a keynote speaker is someone who inspires people, okay? They don't get people to actually buy or invest in themselves. They inspire people, they motivate them, get them feeling good for maybe 45 minutes or an hour. But science and psychology has proven that basically environment's always going to win, all right? So outside of that in keynote, they're going to deflate right back to what they were. Right?
Yeah.
So most people, what the mistake they make is when they're trying to basically have a webinar where they're actually trying to make an offer, they're trying to approach like a keynote speaker. I'm going to basically create this awesome speech. And then I'm just going to basically have 5 minutes and therefore, oh my God, they're just going to love me. They're just going to jump out of their chair, run to their shopping cart, run to the back of the room and just invest in me. Doesn't happen. I wish it was that simple, but trust me, it doesn't. I've had clients who have been in the Speaker Hall of Fame. There's only 100 people in the Speaker Hall of Fame worldwide. Okay, to give you a sense of how exclusive this thing is, right? And I had this conversation with them, said, well, yeah, I get paid like, a lot of money to do this over here. I could just come over here and do this. I'm like, it's a different skill, you see? And so I'm like, if somebody is get paid $30,000, $20,000, $30,000 a speech, can't pull this off, and you're not at that caliber, what makes you think you can do it? Did you see the emphasis that I'm trying to make there?
Yeah.
That's why, like, there's a certain way of creating a webinar or a live stream. So the key again, I hope I'm not belaboring the point, but it's so important because I've seen this over and over again, is you want to start with the offer, right? The transformation, the outcome you can help your client, create in their life or their business or both. And then craft a webinar so it creates a compelling reason why they need to move forward with you versus,
set the stage before you even get into the
exactly. Mm-hmm.
context of the webinar.
Yeah. So I guess, again, I'm not a mystery writer, but it's kind of like, you want to basically have the mystery in mind. You already, if you're writing a mystery, you probably already want to say, look, I have this mystery, right? And I already know who actually committed the mystery, okay? You don't try to write the story and figure it last minute, okay, let me see if I can stick a murder in the middle of the story and then make up like who actually made the murder. It doesn't work that way, right? Like they already know, like, they already have like they already have the outcome and they basically, again, I've never written a mystery novel, but it's probably not a perfect analogy, but you get the idea. You have to be clear on what your outcome is, right? And so it starts with the offer, and then you work backwards, or basically create the stuff so it supports that way. For them, it's they want to move forward with the offer. That's how you maximize your conversion.
So you kind of say, look, imagine here's your perfect scenario with your solution solved at the beginning, and then take it to, okay, well, this is all the stuff that you need to overcome to understand that this is the solution for you, or how
there's basically different there's different styles of webinars, and I've used different versions of this, right? There's popular ones like these are called archetypes. There's like the three secrets of something, right? There's the 3 mistakes of something, or X mistakes. They have to be 3, but 3 is usually a good number. Anything more than that, the brain has to work a little bit harder to understand. So basically it's 3 secrets of something, how to do some outcome, 3 mistakes, if people are already doing it and people say, oh, maybe, maybe I need to show up for this thing because and whatnot. And so there, it's all about like, how much these mistakes are costing you or not knowing these secrets. It's, this is why you're not getting the outcome that you want, right? There's another popular model, which is like, okay, look, basically to do this, it's basically a 7-step process, right? I have a limited amount of time, and therefore I can only go into 2 of these 7 steps, in depth, and therefore, if you want the rest of this, that's why my system exists, right? There's more, but those are 3 of the most popular
Yeah,
ones that's around.
brilliant. Guess running out of time, better ask you a little bit more about your entrepreneurial journey. I mean, obviously you've told us that you started off in software, but what led you there? What is it that
Um, yeah,
brought you
so
down this path?
I had I guess that was a natural progression. I graduated, years ago with a degree in IT, and so I just naturally gravitate toward that. And I found that as much as I enjoyed the technology, it was very short-lived, so maybe a couple of years. And I saw that basically, like, led to a lot of burnout, coders and whatnot. I mean, I saw friends who were coders and all that. I just didn't see there was a future for myself. And then, I basically started being an independent consultant for, many years. And then I actually grew, a consulting company and sold that. And just out of sheer necessity, I had to basically, hire a lot of salespeople, but, always ended up having to drive most of the sales myself. And so along the way, I realized, hey, I actually enjoy the market and the sales a lot more than actually the technical implementation of this stuff, right? And so then I combined a lot of that, background and in as I was saying before, the bigger the package you sell, the more you have to educate your prospects so that that way they feel confident it's the right decision. And that helped a lot when I had to basically do webinars because everything else I said earlier, there is the educational, webinars work best when there's at least an educational component to it. Don't overteach, but at the same time don't make the whole thing about being a lot of just fluff either, right? So teaching doesn't necessarily mean though you to basically explain every step of your system in depth. Teaching can mean that say, hey, here's the consequence of what it is that of your situation if you don't basically address it. You see, and so I don't know. That's basically I'm trying to basically keep it relatively brief.
That's awesome. Now, as you told us a bit about yourself, but what actually dropped? So you kind of said you, out of necessity, you just in that IT kind of role, it just wasn't working out. You needed to find a different way to go about things. Is that kind of what I'm getting at? Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, I when I sold my business, we were doing I think a little bit over 2 million, 2.1 million, and I sold it to a VC funded startup, and we were selling. We were basically. I found that the folks that at the time, I hired 2 salespeople. One I think like maybe 2 salespeople, and it just didn't work out because they how do I explain this? They basically just wanted to club the head, basically club the person on the other side, just get them to sign the agreement. And I said, well, we can get the initial agreement, but we're not going to basically get the larger. We're not going to basically build a relationship long enough to really get the larger assignments that we want, right? Because a lot of time in those situations, kind of like here, there's an initial sale and there's a much larger sale,
Yeah.
downstream a little bit, right? In that world, it's like 5-figure to 6-figure, or 6-figure to 7-figure, whereas here it's usually 4 to 5 or 5 to 6. But the idea is like so I said it helps a lot. Like in other words, like there's times when it makes sense to basically make a pass on this person because even if we can land them as a client, they're not a fit. You see, and so that's what I meant when I said I just kind of learning out of necessity how to sell. And we actually were using at the time they weren't called webinars; they were just called online presentation. Like we were using stuff from Citrix again, back in oh gosh, maybe 98. Oh no, probably not that far back. Probably around 2002, 2003. Back then, literally, like if you can get 3 people on these things, you were like, oh my god, I'm so grateful because the thing was so fragile. You couldn't put a
Oh
thousand
well.
people on this thing back then, right? Back then, basically, the technology was so fragile that you'd probably get 3 people on a presentation at the same time because you're basically selling maybe your
One too many was 1 to 3 at that time.
right. Yeah, 1 to 3 back then was considered one to many because the technology was was so expensive or unstable that there's no way you could do kind of stuff that you did now. I mean, and again, just to put it in perspective, GoToWebinar is a spin-off of Citrix, right? Back then it was
Yeah.
called Citrix Online. That's what we were using. In the corporate world, again, Citrix Online is still more popular than GoToWebinar. GoToWebinar is another brand that they kind of spun off. But anyway, so the point I'm hoping I'm answering your question, but it was just out of necessity. Making a lot of presentation, some of them crash and burn, some of them worked, and just learning along the way what worked and what didn't.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, out of your, out of all the books you've read in your journey, what would you recommend? What has had the most influence in your life, and why?
Sure. One of the books that, I don't want to give the same, answer that probably maybe folks are probably, the usual litany of lists, but some of the ones I found that, that's helped me kind of shape my thinking a little bit is there's a book called The One Thing. It's fairly recent. It's by the gentleman who started William Keller, which is the largest real estate brokerage company here in the US. And they talk about like, what's the one thing that you could focus on that makes everything else easier to solve, right? So it's a good exercise to go through because usually there's one thing that, if you can solve that, it doesn't solve everything else, but it makes everything else easier, right? Like, so for example, if you're doing, if you're using this model we're talking about here, if you're trying to master, the lead generation, you're trying to master the presentation and the follow, all this other stuff, what you want to do is say, okay, well, right now for the next 2 to 4 weeks, okay, which one of this is, if I can just focus on that, it will make everything else, more productive or more, financially fruitful, right? So instead of trying to optimize every step along the way, maybe spend, a week of 1 to 4 weeks trying to say, okay, can I improve just the attendance rate? You see, so it's a particular philosophy that allows you to basically eliminate or put the stuff in the background, so that way you can at least figure out where to focus, put the majority of your focus in, right? There's a couple there's another book by J. Abraham. It's a little bit abstract, but if you can get the thinking, it's actually good. It's called, now Jay's stuff normally is very, very expensive, but he had a book for like $20. It's called How to Get Everything Out of All You Got. And it's a really interesting way of actually like how to basically look at a business opportunity. It's not related to webinar per se, but it's basically a way to say, okay, are there things in front of me that I'm not even realizing that's a significant business asset, right? I'll give you an example. I do a lot of projects with clients where they have a mailing list, and they say, well, we've been mailing them, and this is what we get. I'm like, okay, but like for example, I recently did a project with a client, right? Very small list, and we figure out, we did a promotion back to that list where we pull out $85,000 of additional money, right? And it was a small buyers list, maybe less than 200 people. You say, because I'd been exposed to that idea, I said, look, basically, if you have this, there is money extra there, right? So again, it's like how to make everything out of all you got. My client's like, well, we've already sold these people a $2,000 program. That's the end of that relationship already. I'm like, no, like these folks, when you present it correctly, they're willing to buy a $5,000 program, and then a handful of them are going to be interested in investing a day with you at $15,000, right? And so if you read that book, he doesn't talk necessarily about how to monetize an email list, but he talks a lot about how like companies, even, now the bigger the company, the more opportunities there are that they don't monetize, right? But it's an interesting philosophy where you can basically find a lot of things that you can monetize by yourself, or hiring somebody who's basically trained in that perspective. With bigger companies, for example, I've had situations where we've added like over 7 figure to a business by adding a new income stream, by basically taking their existing webinar to a new market or to a more affluent market, right? Because I'll give you something like specific here. So I have a client right now, right? They got a $5,000 webinar, okay? And the number one objection they get is that, well, it's it's converting well, but the number one question is that it's basically they can't afford it. Now, yes, there's all kind of schools of thought say, well, they want it badly. They'll figure out come up with the money. Even they have to there's all these things, right? I say, okay, that's fine. I accept that as a premise, okay? But here's my counter argument. That offering, I've already identified at least one other market where we can go to it, and where at 3 times the price, it's going to be considered I wouldn't say a bargain, but a reasonable investment. So which do you think is going to be easier, right? Going after another market where at three times the price, they're going to consider a reasonable investment, or trying to sit here and try to convince somebody who can't afford it that they should afford it. Do you see what I
True.
mean?
Yeah.
Right. And the great thing is like the second market, not only is it more, affluent, it's a virgin market. Most people don't know that that market exists.
Oh wow, it's
So
beautiful.
his competitor, if he's continually selling the same people his competitor is selling to, he's got to constantly either spend more or butt heads with them more, right? He could just step right to another market and then say, look, this other market, my competitors don't even know it exists. Or better yet, they do know it exists, but their products can't compete in that market because it's not attractive. He's in an enviable position where his products actually attracted this more affluent market. You see? So that's kind of what I mean. When you read that book, Jay's writing is a little bit abstract. Like he doesn't say, oh, go find a more affluent market to sell to, right? But he basically makes the point that like when you have an opportunity in your hand, what are all the different ways you can monetize it? You see, with a mailing list, can you basically come back to with a higher price offer, right? If you have an existing offer, are there other people that can sell it in a different, maybe in a foreign market, right? Can you license the content? Can you certify people on it? Can you create a co-branding? You see what I mean? Again, he doesn't
Yeah.
talk about this at this level because Jay's teaching is a little bit more, for lack of a better word, more strategic, right? But once you get that, yeah, I mean, if you're read this stuff, it's sometimes like,
Jay
what?
is very flowery.
Yeah, it's like okay, okay. I'm sorry.
Preeminence.
Am I reading business here or is this poetry? Like I'm like, am I reading Hemingway here or am I reading? You know what I mean? Like
Oh
Jason,
man.
right? But if you can get past that, right? It does take like five or six readings. But that perspective, once that shift happens, like wow, then you can say, man, there's opportunities I didn't see. Partner with somebody else, for example, right?
So
A lot of people they let the fact that hey,
his books, Mediocrity to Millions, is amazing. Have you read that one?
which one is that?
Mediocrity to Millions. It's
I had
book.
seen that one. Actually, I was very fortunate. I was working on helping another client, and he actually hosted an event, a $5,000 event in Beverly Hills, and it was hosted by him and Jay. So I got to spend a little bit more time with Jay. It was only about maybe 3 4 weeks ago, but yeah. So anyway,
That's awesome.
so that book, it's not for everybody, and you may have to read it like several times, and maybe 80% of it may not make any sense to you, but that's kind of what I mean, rather than giving people, oh yeah, go read and Think and Grow Rich, which I'm sure everybody has already recommended.
Yeah.
But like, there's some gems out there. Those two have had um, some good help shape my thinking about certain things. There's um, Dan Kennedy's had some um, you know some of the books some people find a little bit too direct. So he's not for everybody, but he's also got some. I consider one of my earliest mentors as well, and he's got a lot of really good material to a lot of his books. If you can't afford, he's basically slowly into semi-retirement, but he's got a lot of really good books. I mean, they're bargains for like 20, $30. You're going to get education that took him decades of to accumulate.
I'm going through his sales letter book at the moment.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Finally, in terms of people who've had the most influence in your life, who would you rate up there, either personal or business?
Sure. I have to say my parents. Definitely. My mom's passed away. But one thing that she always said, when she was my mom, even to the day she passed away, she was illiterate. Because but the thing that was very interesting is that was that it's kind of like like the as you get older you realize how much of an impact your parents have on you. So she was extremely wise, and so she always basically said and again it's probably really poorly translated, but just basically live a good life and help people, right? Very simple advice, but if you live by that, then that's why I try to basically tell people, I say, look, if you come to me, you say you have some awesome product, but it doesn't help the world, I'm probably going to pass on being involved with it, right? Because it's not going to help the world. It's going to make money, but it's not going to help the world, right? So that's how I take that advice, right? And with my dad and both my mom and my dad, it's basically just overcoming a lot of adversity. We're an immigrant family, so all the stuff that most immigrant families have to go through, we went through. Um, my brothers, basically just for being, showing me. I'm the youngest of six, and just showing me I don't have kids yet, so just seeing, for them, like just how what it takes to be really an awesome, being awesome parents, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, on the business front, I've already shared with you some of my, business, some of my business mentors. So,
So, I'll say that. On that front there, you're saying, excuse me,
mhm.
as immigrant parents, what were your parents business minded as well, or was it more the belief systems that they pass on to you?
Well, my parents were in most third world countries, we don't have, Fortune 500 companies. So major companies are not as common. So basically inherently more people are just more naturally entrepreneurial minded, meaning they're shopkeepers and whatnot, right? So yeah, I did grow up in a, in an entrepreneurial my both my parents were basically business owners. But for me it was more the lessons of the fact, like, basically just the idea of having to overcome a lot of adversity, just adapt here. And really, for them, I've always found it amazing that they, what they were willing to go through for their kids. Like, they, I mean, it's,
Mm.
I'm not even at the age of my parents here because they're much older than I am, right? We've been in the States now 40 years, to give you a sense of, how much older my parents are to me. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, I'm almost 50, and they came here in their mid 50s, right? And they didn't speak the language. I'm thinking to myself, like, if I had to suddenly, that'd be the equivalent of me relocating to like a country where I have I cannot even like converse in the language. Imagine how difficult that, what I mean? Like, we take something for granted, right? The ability to actually
Mm.
read the language, open the fridge, and all this other stuff, right? Like read the road signs and all that. But suddenly imagine wake up tomorrow and say, holy crap, I can't do any of that stuff. You see what I mean?
The
Right?
whole landscape changes for you. Got to relearn
Right.
the
I mean, it'd be
rules.
terrifying, right? But they had to go through that to basically, for the benefit of the kids. And so that's why I was kind of look back and say, man, that's just to me, you know, like I said, like immigrant parents, it's like, if anybody's listening, you think about your parents, what they did, some generation been there 4 or 5 generations, so there may have been, but for me, I wasn't born here, so I saw firsthand how difficult it was for my parents to adjust when they came here.
Awesome. Just final question for you, Alex.
Mhm.
If you had to go back into, if you were able to go back in time and speak to your 20-year-old self, what advice would you give them, knowing what you know now?
I think that trying to keep it in perspective, when I was younger, I just felt, oh my God, like, this isn't, so it's really keeping perspective. And that's just something I've really had to learn in the last, probably like, I'd say about 7 to 10 years. My mom passed away. My sister had a stroke. My brother's basically, had cancer. And so I'm like, so now in the past, I talk about doing gratitude exercise, like basically talking, but now I'm consciously actually practicing an exercise, even to for a minute or two. Basically, I wake up, I say, I'm grateful for my health, my, the special person in my life, right now, my girlfriend, and basically my business, right? When I was younger, I don't know that would have been in that order. Last year I had a, a kidney stone. Oh man, when people talk about, like, you really have clarity about what's important. Trust me, when I was sitting there and, at the time, everybody was out of town, so I was here by myself. Man, sitting there and literally crawling on the floor, to try to get to the phone to make a phone call. You really realize, my God, like, basically, if you don't have your health, you don't really have much. You know what I mean? Like, I watched literally my sister lose her mobility. She had a stroke. She
Oh,
can't
geez.
she can't move now, right? Without help. You see? So, that to me is kind of like the exercise. I'm sorry, the advice I'll probably give my younger self is like, if you look back at what you're dealing with right now, is it going to matter really in a year? If not, just let it go.
Cool. Very cool. Mate, and if people want to learn more about you, where would they go?
Probably the best thing I can offer to folks is just go to my website, and then I have a, I think I mentioned occasionally here, just basically on my website, and there's also, I have a book that they can download. So my main website is expertriches.com, and then if they want to download my book, which talks about, creating big ticket programs and also running webinars, is basically at expertriches.com/book. So.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Oh man, that was brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon.
All right. Well, I enjoyed this, Joe's.